The Catholic Church is in crisis and now the Vatican is on the offensive. The mounting global scandal involves claim and counterclaim of cover-up and denial. A legal case against the Pope himself is being prepared. But what should he do to stem the damage? And what are the long-term implications for the Church itself? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm Hamish MacDonald. Welcome to the programme. Could you really sue the Pope? Well, the British academic Christopher Hitchens thinks you can, and he's trying to do just that. He wants to take the head of the Roman Catholic Church to court for what he says is the long-term systematic cover-up of child sexual abuse cases inside the Church. It all started 2 months ago in Germany, and it spread like wildfire, with similar reports from Ireland, Italy, Netherlands and the United States. People are angry with the Church for mishandling the cases. Pope Benedict XVI has even been accused of ignoring and helping to cover up the abusers in his former role at the Vatican. A house in Germany where he once lived was this week attacked by graffiti artists. And now, as the Church scrambles to contain the controversy, the Vatican's second-in-command seems to have made matters worse. He's denied that the vows of celibacy have anything to do with child sexual abuse. Instead, he blames it on homosexuality.
Many psychologists, many psychiatrists have demonstrated that there is no relationship between celibacy and paedophilia. But many others have demonstrated, I was told recently, that there is a relationship between homosexuality and paedophilia. This is true. I have the documents of the psychologists. This is the problem.
Well, that's the starting point for our debate today. Joining us to talk about this from London, we have Mark Stevens of the law firm Finers Stevens Innocent. Mr. Stevens is one of the lawyers who will be seeking to prosecute the Pope. Peter Jennings joins us from Birmingham, where he's the spokesman for the Archbishop of Birmingham. And Greg Watts is also in London. He's an author who's written several books, including Labourer in the Vineyard, a biography of Pope Benedict XVI. Gentlemen, thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme. Let's start with Peter Jennings in Birmingham, if we can. Do you think the Pope is a fair target for lawyers?
I think it is certainly outrageous what is happening now as a cheap publicity stunt. I think that the Pope, as head of the Roman Catholic Church, a universal church, has done his best and is doing his best through very difficult situations. And there is certainly, in my view, no deliberate cover-up. I think some of the cases in the past have been handled badly and probably clumsily. But I don't think there's been a systematic cover-up as being suggested in some of the more sensational stories that have appeared in the media recently.
Mark Stevens in London, a cheap publicity stunt, is that what this is?
No, I think anyone who suggests that is, frankly, almost as ludicrous as the people who suggest that this is a problem caused by Jews or homosexuals. This is about concern about the welfare of children, about the fact that there are paedophiles in the community, which the Roman Catholic Church has identified, has evidence about, yet has not handed that information over to the police or law enforcement authorities. So the result of that is that none of the paedophile priests, whether frocked or unfrocked, are on the sex offenders register. None of them have been brought before the courts, and none of them are under the scrutiny, the proper scrutiny, of the law enforcement authorities. That is what you would expect. What you expect is a reasonable and responsible church to come forward and to deliver up the information that they have on these paedophile priests, and to also deliver up the evidence. Unfortunately, they haven't done that.
All right, Peter Jennings in Birmingham, I think you're trying to respond.
I will respond by saying that is a complete rubbish what your guest has just said. The fact is there are priests in the Archdiocese of Birmingham here, ex-priests who have been in jail, served jail sentences, who are currently on the sex offenders list, who have been rooted out by us, thoroughly investigated, handed to the proper authorities, have been taken to court, have been found guilty, have been in prison or are serving a prison sentence at this present time. So what your lawyer said is total misleading the public.
Well, I'm sorry, Peter Jennings, that's just not correct. The information that is absolutely out there was the subject of judicial inquiry in Ireland, for example, the subject of investigations in the United States.
I'm talking about the Catholic Church in England and Wales.
Well, you may be confining yourself to England and Wales. I'm afraid I don't. I confine myself to the welfare of children universally who fall within the ambit of the Church. What the Church has done is through papal edicts, which have come through successive popes from the 60s, which were communicated by Pope Ratzinger when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, who have been carried out by him when he was Bishop of Munich, was that the Catholic Church required a bond of papal secrecy from the abused child, and that abused child was required on pain of excommunication not to reveal or discuss the problems of the priests that had abused them. Now, that is unacceptable. The Catholic Church, if it cares for children and the welfare of children, should release those children that have signed or have confessed to that bond from their bond, allow them to do it, and they should hand over paedophile priests in the future. What has happened is that in the last couple of days...
They are doing that.
Rome has actually... Hang on a second.
Their Catholic Church is doing that. You're talking incorrect rubbish.
In the past, they have not done that, and that you cannot deny.
When do you take the past to?
I take the past
when is
from
the
when
past?
these edicts
Yesterday,
started,
a week, a year,
in the 1960s.
2 years?
If there is a paedophile, they don't change their ways. If there's a paedophile in the community, which the Catholic Church knows about and the law enforcement does not, then they should be identified and the evidence handed to the proper authorities. That is the proper, appropriate thing to do.
I don't disagree with that.
Okay.
Well, in that case, why doesn't Rome do that?
Let me just bring Greg Watts into this conversation, if we can, for a moment, because you've written a biography of the Pope. Do you think he is a fair target? Because, of course, this issue is much broader, as we've already heard, than just the United Kingdom and Ireland. It's something that has effectively spread right around the world, wherever the Catholic Church is.
Well, first of all, we all know what's happened, both the abuse, the pain that the victims have suffered, and the cases of cover-up. So we know about that, and I think this conversation is moving a bit further on. Personally, I think the Vatican should take a leaf out of Mark Stevens' book. Mark's an excellent media lawyer, kind of patron saint of hopeless cases, and I think Mark's profile is doing very well out of this, and it's preposterous that the Pope could be.
But come on, let's be fair. It's not just lawyers that are angry with the Pope and the Vatican over the handling of this. There is enormous public outcry, is there not?
Just to pick up on what Mark was saying about secrecy and children being somehow, bound not to talk about things. He's referring to a 1962 document, which was basically to provide confidentiality to both the victims and to deal with priests facing allegations. And let's remember, the law, I understand, is that you are innocent until proven guilty. But this document has been misrepresented. I think Mark was misrepresenting it there. And I don't know of one example where a Catholic has been excommunicated for blowing the whistle on a priest who was abusing.
Okay,
but also, just one further point.
Hold on, before you go further, because I just want to clarify part of what you're talking about there.
Just one further point, Mark, just to finish that point.
Before we go to the next point, though, let's just get some clarity on what you just mentioned, because there is this perception, is there not, that the Church has chosen to deal with these issues of pedophilia according to its own guidelines rather than what perhaps the legal guidelines are. Do you see why that perception exists?
I can see why it exists through misleading representations, but just to deal with that specific point, I read, before I came out for the interview today, I read the 1962 document. It's there for anyone to read on the Vatican website. Nowhere in that document does it say that the civil authorities must not be involved. The document, for viewers who don't know about this, is basically canon law. It's church law, which runs parallel with civic law, and the best way to think of canon law is kind of internal rules and regulations. But nowhere in that document does it say that civil authorities must not be informed. Now, I think there have been cases down the years where the Church hasn't acted quickly in involving civil authorities, and I think some bishops have been involved in cover-ups. I'll certainly concede that, but I think we need to get this this document clear. This document was revised in 2001 by Cardinal Ratzinger, who is now Pope Benedict XVI.
OK, Mark Stevens in London. Jack Valero wrote in today's Guardian in response to reporting about the fact that this case is now underway, or at least being prepared. He said that the Pope is the one in the Vatican who's done the most to rid the Church of this scourge, referring to child sexual abuse. I mean, it is a bit of a sort of a topic of interest, the Pope, and whether or not he's involved in covering this up. But really, is he the one that needs to be taken to court?
Well, people are really sort of confusing two things. The Pope is the titular head of the Church, and therefore, if there is a systemic problem within the Church, it is he who, as the head of the Church, just like a chief executive officer, if you like, carries the responsibility for it. Unfortunately, the Church has not delivered up the paedophile priests to the civil authorities. It has dealt with this canonically. It has dealt with it in accordance with not just the two instructions that have been alluded to by Greg. They have actually had a series more. And what has happened is that not every single priest has been pushed forward to the criminal authorities. And that, I think, is the problem, because what you have are people who have gone off on pilgrimages of penitence on instructions from the Church because the Church believes them to be pedophiles, yet they have not been delivered up to the criminal law enforcement authorities so that they can be put on the sex offenders register, that they can go through the due process of the law. And I think it's the problem of the Church not pushing that into the public domain, not giving that information to law enforcement, which is causing disquiet not only amongst us Catholics, but amongst a wider community at large.
Okay.
And I think that is the problem.
All right,
Hamish,
Mark,
can I come in on this, please?
If you can just hold it for a moment, because I think now's probably a good time for us just to look at the guidelines that were issued this week. A bit of damage control, if you like, from the Catholic Church. It is just a guideline, though, I should point out. It's not an official instruction, and it's not particularly different, at least that's what critics are saying, from previous Vatican policy. It says that bishops and clerics worldwide should report abuse cases to the police if the law requires them to do so. They will be required to investigate every allegation and report their findings to the Church. Meanwhile, they can take precautionary measures to protect children from abusive priests. However, it does not have a zero-tolerance policy. That is, that priests who abuse children can remain in their position if they promise not to do it again. All right, let's go to Peter Jennings in Birmingham. I think you wanted to say something, but I'd be particularly interested to hear what you have to say about that, because the criticism, of course, is that the Church is not really doing enough to rebuild trust and faith in it.
The Catholic Church is a worldwide church, and that's why I specifically want to talk about the Catholic Church in England and Wales, which is the church that I deal with and speak about. I'm not talking about the church in America or Ireland. I'm talking about England and Wales. I was press secretary for 9 years to Archbishop Vincent Nichols, who's now the Archbishop of Westminster, who was chairman of COPCA, the organisation set up within the Catholic Church to deal with these matters after the Nolan Report in 2001. And I can assure you that Archbishop Nichols and I looked at case after case and handed people over to the police, to the proper authorities, where there was a case to answer, or where there's even any doubt about anything, the police were immediately brought in. And it was the victims themselves that in the year 2001 said to us, they said, actually, we don't like this confidentiality clause in the settlements that they were receiving through insurance companies or through solicitors. And we said, fine, if you don't like the confidentiality clause, we'll remove it immediately. And we did, but it was for their protection as well. So in a sense, it was removed straight away. Within the Archdiocese of Birmingham in 2001, there were no confidentiality clauses. A victim could go to the media and say, this is what I've received from the Church, these are the letters the Church has sent to me. There has been an open and transparent policy, in my opinion, in the Archdiocese of Birmingham, which through Archbishop Vincent Nichols led the way in the Catholic Church in England and Wales.
Greg Watts, please go ahead.
If I could just add to what Peter said, I edit a newspaper called The Priest. It's the official newspaper for the 4,500 priests of England and Wales. And I was at a conference, a national conference last year in Leeds, and there was huge concern amongst the priests that priests the pendulum was, if you like, swung the other way. Were now the church was so on the ball that they were worried about innocent priests being arrested. In fact, there was one priest in London who was removed from ministry overnight for 2 years while he was investigated. There was no evidence found that he'd been guilty, and put then back in ministry. But priests, and let's remember, we're talking about such a tiny number of priests who've committed the abuse, but the majority of priests who are just good guys are worried that they're suddenly going to get someone making an allegation and removed from ministry. So Mark's, claim that the church isn't doing enough.
But the truth is, we wouldn't be in this situation, would we, if the church had handled it properly? I mean, I've got here a list of 30 cases of Roman Catholic priests accused of abuse who've been moved overseas before it could be investigated properly. I mean, you're saying that these are sort of isolated cases. The truth is that the activity over a long period of time hasn't enabled the community to put their faith in the church as an institution.
No, I agree with Mark that I think over a long period of time that the Catholic Church has not handled many cases well. And I'm not going to sit here and defend something that the hierarchy have done, which I think the pain of the victims, what they've been through, because of the actions of bishops. And I think, we've seen some bishops resign in Ireland. We've seen a bishop resign in, I think, Norway recently. So I'm not going to defend individual bishops or members of the hierarchy on these sorts of issues. I'll agree with Mark that the church hasn't acted quickly often enough, and it has covered up. But I think what we're looking at now, things have moved on, thankfully, from that. And the church is very vigilant, and it's very robust. And Pope Benedict is very robust. So I think, lessons have been learned.
All right, Peter Jennings, I mean, we just heard some criticism there from someone that is essentially supportive of the Catholic Church. Even you wouldn't say, would you, that the way the Church has handled the current crisis has been particularly effective, particularly these comments from Cardinal Bertoni in Chile saying that homosexuality was the reason that all this pedophilia was occurring, not anything to do with celibacy?
Personally, I was appalled when he said that. I couldn't believe my ears. He's got it wrong. And I've covered the Vatican, as Greg knows, since 1975. I'm accredited to the Vatican Press Office on a temporary basis. I go to Rome frequently. And I must say that the Vatican Press Office, perhaps shall we say, hasn't moved up to date with the rest of the world media. It is lagging behind. And I do feel that. And I've shared that with Father Lombardi openly.
But come on, this isn't really just about media handling, is it? This isn't about the way you talk to the press. This is about attitudes. I mean, this guy isn't saying that because he thinks it appeals to the media. He says it because he thinks it, presumably.
No, the answer is that I think you evidently haven't been to Rome and understand how the Catholic Church does its press and handles its press and PR. I agree with Greg that certainly I think a lot of the cases in the past, and I'm now going back to the 60s and possibly to the mid-70s, were badly handled. I certainly concede that. I think that we come to the year, let's say a cut-off at about 2000, 2001, I think things, particularly in England and Wales and the Church in Great Britain, have moved forward significantly. And I think we're now leading the way. And I would hope that the Vatican would certainly take up some of the ideas that we put in place then, that are proving to be best practice. And as Greg said, some poor priests are being accused wrongfully. And I think that is absolutely wicked.
Peter Jennings, before we get too far down the track with this, I just want to be really clear. You think that Cardinal Bertoni made his comments saying that homosexuality was the reason for pedophilia, not celibacy, was not because he thought it, but because the Vatican Press Office told him to say it? Is that what you're saying?
No, I certainly don't. I'm not saying that at all. I was talking about two separate things. I'm saying I agreed that Cardinal Bertoni's remarks were completely unfortunate, and I don't know where he got that specific piece of information. He was evidently sold a dud one on that, and I think that he should probably have done more research before, as Cardinal Secretary of State, he made a comment that actually, I think the friends of mine who are homosexual actually found it deeply offensive, and so do I. And I hope that they quickly apologise and put that right. But I'm talking now about the way that the Catholic Church presents itself. I don't think in the year 2010 it does it particularly effectively. I can remember, as I'm sure Greg can, only 5 years ago this very week, we were in Rome together covering the election and the inaugural Mass of Pope Benedict XVI. It's only 5 years ago. But in my opinion, the press handling of things in the Vatican hasn't particularly improved from that time, let alone, you know, moving into the year we live in.
Mark Stevens, in London, is this all just because really the Vatican press office is no match for the likes of you?
No, not at all. There is a real endemic problem. It's a systemic problem. It's been a systemic problem for years. It may have got slightly better in certain dioceses in this country. Birmingham may be an exemplar, but it certainly isn't the template across the planet. This is a universal church, a universal Catholic church, and unfortunately the standards applied by this church are not universal, as we saw yesterday when Cardinal Bertone made that rather ill-informed and unfortunate statement.
Greg Watts, your response to that?
Well, just to pick up on Cardinal Bertone's comment, I mean, the fact is the majority of cases that we were labelling abuse, and the word abuse, and I'm aware I'm talking to a lawyer here, covers a wide range of actions, which is different, as I understand it, from paedophilia, which involves small children. I'm not sure what the age difference is, but anyway, as I understand it, paedophilia refers to small children. The vast majority of cases,
I think that most people believe that paedophilia means that any child under the age of consent. I think that's what most people believe.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, I'm not, yeah, so, but the majority of cases that I'm aware of, and that the John Jay report that was produced, I think 4 or 5 years ago, examined, were typically teenage boys, very few cases of females. Now, going back to Cardinal Bertone, I don't know, but to me, if the majority of victims are male and the majority of perpetrators are male, that would suggest to me that there's a homosexual factor. Now, I'm not saying that if a person's homosexual, like Peter, I've got homosexual friends, my next door neighbours are 2 fantastic gay guys, but I'm just saying that that's perhaps a factor. I don't know, more research I think needs to certainly go into it, but maybe that gives some kind of context to what Cardinal Bertone was saying. Now, I think my experience as a journalist, having written about this and having spoken to priests, and I've interviewed priests actually who've been convicted, is that the majority of cases do seem to involve young boys. Now, I guess we can all draw our own conclusions from that.
Right. Unfortunately, that's where
we're
going to have
getting to the position where we're getting to we're getting to a point where we're moving to whether people should be apologists for Cardinal Bertone or not. Clearly, they should not. The fundamental question here is whether or not the Catholic Church, not just in Birmingham, but across the planet, is taking hold of this problem, is releasing everybody that has been forced to sign confidentiality clauses so that they can, if they wish, talk to counsellors, talk to other people to get over this particular experience, unfortunate experiences which they have had, right. And whether or not the Catholic Church across the planet is actually handing over the evidence to police and law enforcement so that paedophiles, who we understand very rarely change their own ways, can be identified and can also stand trial. And that is the fundamental question. That is the fundamental question which the Catholic Church is still not addressing. And right. That's the problem which is causing a great dissonance amongst the faithful and the wider population, both in this country and abroad.
OK, Mark Stevens, I'm going to have to interrupt you there, and that's unfortunately where we're going to have to leave this discussion today, but obviously the story is going to run further, so we do hope to revisit it. To our guests, Mark Stevens in London from the law firm Finers Stevens Innocent, from Birmingham, Peter Jennings, and from London, Greg Watts, the Catholic author. All of you, we appreciate you coming on the programme today, and we appreciate you participating in this discussion. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. There'll be plenty today. Email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me and the team here at Inside Story, thanks for watching.